Hey everybody, it's amazing how things change. This episode is a perfect example of that. My name is Phil, and you are listening to The Lip. Yes, this is The Lip, episode number 165, 165th consecutive episode that I've done in pretty much a three and some change year times frame. I can promise you right now, this episode was very much the classic line of making lemonade when somebody gives you lemons. Normally, the show is featured on Spotify and it comes out on Saturdays, which this show will continue to come out on Saturdays. However, I had some difficulties moving some things around, and it turns out that I found a better platform than Spotify for my show. Don't get me wrong, Spotify treated me great. I liked what I was doing there, but it just turned out that I was getting very, very complacent to the point where I didn't even have any goals for the show itself. And anyone will tell you that if you're going to do a show, you should have some sort of goals to it. Originally, when I started doing the lip, I had a simple goal of just wanting to do it. In other words, I was really just happy to be there. But as went on, I started to just get complacent. Don't get me wrong, my episodes took some time for me to work through and figure out what I wanted to do. However, I wasn't necessarily too worried about anything except for the show getting published. It's all that was in my head. I wasn't really overly concerned with how many listeners there were because I said it about 1,000 times during my run on Spotify that I am the number one listener, the first listener who has heard every single episode of the show because of the fact that, well, I'm making them all, correct? That makes sense, right? But this week, having the difficulties that I had, it made me think, what do I really want from the show? Do I want it to be stagnant and just sort of where it was, or do I want it to grow? And I made the decision that without question, I absolutely want the show to grow. I came up with a set of goals that I would definitely like to accomplish, and the top of that list is the first goal that I want to hit. The big one is eventually I want to have one of those YouTube awards. Now that I'm putting the show on YouTube, that seems to be what I want to do. I want one of those awards. I've seen them in the backgrounds of countless numbers of podcasts that I've seen and other shows where people have been doing them on YouTube. And I realize that that's something that makes sense. It's something that is A, attainable, B, something that really gives you the motivation to actually do what you want to do. And knowing that, I've decided that that's what my plan is going to be. I'm going to put everything into my YouTube channel. And that's where we're going to go with this. At Phil the Lip is where you will be able to find the lip from now. And I can promise you that my goal isn't going to change. But of course, in order to get one of those YouTube awards, you have to start somewhere. And the most important thing you need to do is I need to get people to subscribe. That's my first and foremost agenda. I need everybody who's listening to like and subscribe this show and all of my other content, which I will be putting on YouTube. My No Mercy pizza reviews, which will be continuing. For those of you who have been listening to me before, but for the new listeners, I have been reviewing pizza. I've only done one so far because, again, like I said, I was a little bit complacent and, for lack of a better word, I was a little lazy when I should have been actually humping and going forward with what was a New Year's sort of resolution that I said that I wanted to accomplish. How do I mean that? Well, what I did was I set myself a goal, which was to actually review pizza because I had been seeing several people reviewing all types of food, some of them pizza, and it seemed to me that every single person who was reviewing anything just seemed like they fell in love with it. It was as if each and every item that these people were tasting was a recipe that was collaborated by Emeril Lagasse, Wolfgang Puck, Gordon Ramsay, Ming Tsai, and they all collaborated to create the perfect food. And then, in order for these recipes to be made, it appeared to me as if each ingredient was selected at its peak of freshness and made to order for all these people because everything they're eating seems to have been just the best. Now, you and I all know that you're going to go to a restaurant and a lot of times you're going to find consistent food that's going to be good. But then there's going to be times that you're not going to really like it. And then there's a lot of times that the food is in the middle. So I decided that I want to actually go in without any mercy and say what it is. If it's good, if it's bad, if it's okay, I'm going to let you know. Period. And that is what I started last month. You can find that on the YouTube channel, of course. And as I'm recording this, I'm going to begin scouting out where I want to go for the next one because my initial plan was to only do one a month, but I may do two a month now that I'm trying to focus on getting the YouTube up and running. On that same note, the episode that I'm doing right now was supposed to be about TV series and the characters that I found to be my favorite and that I found to be the most involved in the series and evolved the best throughout the series. Now, considering that I'm switching platforms and many of you may not have been listeners to the show, I have decided to push this episode off in lieu of this episode that I'm going to do right now, which is about things that are just a little different. Turns out that this is the perfect week for it. My show is now going to be different. Things in life are just a little different than they were when I, for certain, were growing up as a Gen Xer, a very, very young Gen Xer, I might add. But things were definitely different now than they were when we were growing up. And I wanted to highlight some of those things. I had planned on doing it in August, but like I said, since the show has changed and it is now different, maybe it's time to make this episode about things that are just a little different. And so I shall. But I'm not going to break off of my segmental agenda. So, right now, I'm going to start off with the first of my normal segments. This segment is called Fill in the Blank. The blank is a simple questions answer, just like you'd see when you were in school. Those fill in the blank questions, you know? And so the question is, do I think I made the best decision to change the show a little bit? And I'm going to fill in that blank by saying, I absolutely believe that I did. Because I'm now a little bit more goal oriented as far as the show is concerned. I'm not looking at it from the perspective of, here I go, let me just put in another show and move on. No, I want this show to grow. and I want the audience to have an experience like I have when I'm making the show. I get excited to do it, and I'd like people to be excited to listen to it. And that's where my focus is. So, once again, to fill in the blanks, my question was, do I think I did the right thing to change the show the way I'm about to change it? And the answer is absolutely. And I can't wait to see how it progresses in time. Next, I'm about to go into what I call the main event. Now, the main event of the show is just what it sounds like. For those of you who are new listeners, I'm going to discuss the main topic of what I want to discuss right here, right now. And the main topic is, like I said, things are just a little different. And I'm going to talk about some of those things that you see now that were nowhere close to what they were when I was a kid at 46, and people who are older will definitely have noticed that as well. You younger people who may be listening, well, it is what it is. You're not quite at that point where you've seen the full change of what it was. Some people who are a little bit younger than me may have seen how things began to evolve and get to the point where we are now, but it's even more scarier when you can actually see it happen in real time. The first one that I'm going to talk about is the fact that McDonald's, everybody's favorite fast food restaurant, the biggest one in the world, we're talking about Ronald McDonald, the clown, and all his friends that were with him when I was growing up. He had Grimace, who is actually a drop of grape soda. It's kind of cool. Characters like the Hamburglar, who try to steal your hamburger, and then there's the Fry Guys. All those people would run around, and it'd be a jolly place to go. You could go outside, and there would be a sort of jungle gym set up where you could go play and eat at the same time. And the colors were so vibrant. There were reds and oranges, and well, it kind of looks like the background for the show right now, which happens to be an original painting of mine. We'll discuss that a little bit later. McDonald's was bright, and it just made kids want to go there. Unfortunately, it made kids want to go there. And anyone who knows even the slightest bit about food can tell you that McDonald's is not the healthiest place in the world to eat. And as a result, they were blamed for childhood obesity, which is not a good thing. But like anything in moderation, it's okay. But that's not what we do. We overdo a little bit of everything, right? And so that big, bright, bold McDonald's that just was inviting and told everybody, come on in. We have a clown who's going to make everybody happy and have your birthday parties here, and just cheap priced food. It's no more. What we're looking at when we look at McDonald's now is a very darker restaurant. Anybody can tell you who's at least my age will remember those bright places, and now you go past the McDonald's and it's very, very darker, more grown up is what I think they're going for. But from my aspect, it seems like it's almost like gives you a sense of dread to me anyway. It's like, oof, this is a little bit more of a place that's well, we're not gonna necessarily advertise being as cheery. It seems more corporate. Before they would be happy to have the children around, it would seem like, but any more of the commercials are really geared towards young adults, it seems like to me. It's a different place. It's not the same place that it was when I was growing up or when many people my age were growing up. It's a sad reality, but it's a reality nonetheless. McDonald's has changed. Has it changed for the better? Has it changed for the worse? I couldn't tell you. It seems like, as far as revenue goes, it doesn't seem to be affecting them in any way. So, in the words of the gambler, it would be sort of a push, right? It really hasn't hurt the business in any way. But for people like me who can fondly remember those days, it's just not quite what it used to be. Next thing, it seemed like, just in general, just shopping in general, I have never been the kind of person who wanted to just go and spend all day at a store. But to me, it seemed like it was nice when you would go into a store, you look around, you picked up an item, you looked at it, and you said to yourself, Self, I think I want this. And then you'd pull out some cash or a credit card and you'd pay for it and you'd leave. Now that is not the case. Of course, the pandemic in 2020 absolutely supercharged this. But it seems like every single store has an app. And with that app, you can buy stuff directly and never even need to be in the store. Now, it seems like it's a great idea on the surface to me because now you don't have to go in your car, drive down the road, go into the building, pick up the item, leave. You could do it in the comfort of your own home on your smartphone or your computer. Just look at it. Hey, I want that. Click it. Put your card number in, and they'll send it to you in a couple of days. And if you really want it, you could have it come to you overnight, depending on the store, depending on the app, and depending on what it is and where it is. You can have it right away, like literally overnight. And I remember, now I'm sounding like the old man sitting on the porch, but in truth, I used to think it was cool when you had to use the catalogs instead of the apps. When I was a kid, you'd go and you get those big, thick catalogs from those stores, and you'd thumb through them and you'd say, "Oh, that looks really cool," and you'd stare at it for a while, and then you'd ask your mother. Well, I would ask my mother for it, or she'd say, "Save up your money," and I would go and do so, and then I would have it. I'd give it to her. Of course, as a kid, you didn't know about shipping and handling and all that stuff, and so she covered that charge. But you'd fill out the order form, and you had to be real careful not to mess it up. Then you'd stick it in the envelope, you put it in the stamp on it, put it in the mailbox, and the little disclaimer underneath, inside that big thick uh, catalog, would be, order may take 8 to 10 weeks for delivery. And you would be like, all right, 8 to 10 weeks, that's not too bad. And then the first week would go by, you wouldn't think about it. The second week would go by, you'd start to get a little antsy. And then 3 weeks would go by, and you're like, well, it's gonna be coming, but it's gonna be a while. It's almost like when you're waiting for Christmas as a kid. And so, for me personally, what I would do is I would pretty much turn my brain off for the next 4 or 5 weeks. Because now we're about 7 weeks in at this point, and you're not really thinking about it. And then 8, 9 weeks in, it still didn't creep into your mind. And for me, I would always have that slight anticipation, but wasn't really thinking about it because it just seemed like when you were a kid, 8 to 10 weeks, which is about 2 months, would take forever. And so now, of course, as an adult, you know that 2 months is really nothing. But as a kid, it's an eternity. And so you started thinking about other stuff until that one day you're coming home from school and bam, there's a package for you. All of a sudden, that excitement comes right back and you don't even know what to do or how to handle yourself. It's like you've never seen a package before. But when it comes, you've lost your mind, you open it up, and there it is. The excitement of having waited so long, and here is the payoff. Nowadays, with the apps, and even to this day, it still makes me scratch my head when I order something and it comes in 4 days because I didn't ask for the express shipping. 4 days? That's express shipping? It's like, my goodness, if I ordered a package back when I was 10 years old and it showed up in 4 days, I would probably lose my mind. I would literally probably turn into a Hulk and be so excited and not angry, but I would go on a rampage because my package showed up so quickly. But nowadays, 4 days seems like an eternity. You're like, man, I ordered that thing on Tuesday. Why isn't it here yet? Meanwhile, it's only Friday. But it's coming on Saturday. And when it does, you're like, man, I can't believe I had to wait so long. In my mind, I then have to go back in time and remember this is 4 days. 4 weeks would have barely been half the time you waited for the package to show up back when you were a kid. What are you complaining about? But in truth, that is definitely something that is different from the way it used to be. And different in such a really long way. It's crazy. Now, I'm going to go into something that is in the last 24 years for me personally become a staple of August for me. Now, I am an avid football fan. I love it. Love football. I also love video games. For all the new listeners out there, I am a 49ers fan. I must let you know that when I was younger, I loved playing a variety of different football games because there were a variety of different football games to be played. For example, there was Tecmo Super Bowl, which is still considered one of the best football games of all time, even though it was just 8-bit. It came out for Nintendo, and you only had like 6 plays on offense and defense. The game was just incredible and had iconic music that to this day people my age just can't help but memorize, like, and repeat in their head. Like for me, the song for when a player got injured, and the song that was played when you got a touchdown. I'll tell you right now, I ended up getting hurt during football practice in my sophomore year, where I ended up having to have knee surgery. And subconsciously, when I took the hit that injured my knee, I'm not ashamed to admit this, but in my head, I started playing this music. Dun 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 dun. What that is a very poor rendition of the song that Tecmo Super Bowl would use when a player got injured. It immediately just went right through my head, and I just couldn't help it because I felt the pain, and instantaneously that Tecmo Super Bowl music came to mind. Now, on that same note, I evolved to the sports talk footballs, and they had a few more plays. It was a lot of fun, and eventually I got older in my 20s, early 20s, not even 20s, I guess. Yeah, I guess it was 20 when I started playing Game Day, which was a game that came out for PlayStation. Had more plays, had better graphics and all that stuff, and it was fun. But now, to the meat of the matter. Around 2001, I was playing Game Day and it just didn't feel right. I wasn't happy with it for some reason. I'd been playing 3 years worth of it, and it just, for some reason, it wasn't doing it for me anymore. And I've known about the game that I'm about to talk about for years, and I never played it. But it turned out my cousin, who was not the biggest football fan in the world, but he ended up getting a copy of Madden uh, 2001. And I started playing it, and for the first time, believe it or not, I'd never played a Madden game until 2001. But once I did, I became so hooked with it that I was like, what was I doing my entire life? Why was I messing with all those other games? I didn't know. And I then became hooked. I became a Madden guy as far as the game was concerned. Of course, during that time period, Madden 2002, 2003, 2004, I I was really into it. I liked the way the game was being played. But even up until now, I still love the game. But this is the thing that I find that is just a little different. And it's a little bit of hurt piece in my mind. Because during those times when I was starting to get into Madden, I discovered that there was this whole culture around Madden that I was unaware of for all that time prior to playing it. And that culture was the pre order party and receiving of the game. I didn't know anything about this until about 2003. And it was like an event. It was like the greatest event, like a WrestleMania sort of event for video games. It was just all over the country. There would be people who would be lined up outside of the stores, the video game stores, and they had either made a pre order or they were attempting to buy the game at that time. And during that point, people would be just enjoying talking about how they enjoyed the old game, how they're excited for the new game. Just an eclectic group of people. You'd be all types of ages. You'd have people who were my age now in their upper 40s. You'd have kids who were in their teens, and everybody in between be waiting for this game to come out and all be there outside the store. Sometimes, depending on where you were, either in New Jersey, I would end up going to the Ocean County Mall and the video game store in there. So they would open up the mall and the people would be inside the mall waiting. Now, the people who were in the store, sometimes they would have, well, a lot of times, they would have chips, they would order pizza, they would have soda. It would be an entire party for this launch of this game. And it was just the highlight of the video game year for me because I like to call it my base game. Like I would play that game every day. And sometimes I might not even. There was a couple of years where I would go and play Madden so much and so frequently that I didn't even entertain some of the other games. But it was that time period where you would go and you would talk to people about the game and just have that camaraderie about being there to be one of the first to get the game. One year, I actually didn't go to the Madden Open, and I felt bad afterwards because I said to myself, I was over my cousin's house, and I'm like, yeah, I can get it the next day, and so I did, and it just didn't feel right. It was just a little off when I did that, and I never made that mistake again up until about 2000. When was it? 2013, I guess it was, somewhere in that neighborhood. For all that time, it was a good 10 years that I kept doing it. And then um, I stopped doing it with the little kids at the time. My children were very, very young. Very, very young. We're talking 1 and 2, like young, young. And so I wouldn't go quite as frequently until I realized in the last couple of years that those opening day launch parties started to slow down. And why? Because things got different. Did they get different for a good reason or a bad reason? Well, again, I'm going to call it a push because what happened is the massive amount of streaming games directly to your system as opposed to having hard copy games. There's really no reason to have to go out at night and stand in a line and get the game when you could just click a couple buttons and wait for it to download, and here's your game. You're ready to go. Admittedly, I continued to get hard copy of the game until 2021. I was a major holdout. I kept holding out until 2021 when I got my first Xbox S series. Not even the X series yet. I didn't get the X series until 2023. I think it was just recently I got it. It was just last year I got the X series. And the only reason why I got the X series is because it had a disc drive, and I, again, being old school, have a million Blu-rays and DVDs and no way to play them. Hence the X series with the disc drive. So boom, I can play all that stuff. But for the last 3 seasons of Madden, I have been streaming it, and it works, and I've not had any issues with it. But it's just a little different because this year, as I mentioned, I am a 49ers fan, and Christian McCaffrey, the 49ers running back who became the Offensive Player of the Year, is on the cover of the game. And I was very conflicted for the last 2.5, 3 weeks with whether or not I was going to go and buy the hard copy of the game or stream it like I've been doing the last couple of years, because it would be that much cooler to have a 49er on the cover of the game that's a hard copy. That would have just felt better to me. It just really would have. But they made it difficult because the pre-order to download was actually a little cheaper, and anymore you want to try to cut costs wherever you can. And as a result, I downloaded the game for pre-order. So when August comes up, I'll just wait for it and download it. Having said that, that doesn't mean that in, I don't know, next July 2025, I might not just go to a video game store and look for a used copy just so I can get my hands on the hard copy just because there's a 49er on it. And don't let the 49ers win the Super Bowl this year. There's absolutely no way that I'm not going to get the hard copy of the game. It's going to happen. That's just what it's going to be. But I do miss standing in the line waiting for that hard copy. I truly do. Because I have one of my favorite stories in life, and it regards to getting a hard copy of Madden. Um, don't quote me on which year it was. I can't remember. It was either Madden 04 or Madden um, 03. I don't remember which one it was. But I went to the mall to go purchase the game. I did not, and I mentioned I did not put in a pre-order for the game. And I'm standing there knowing that there's two separate lines for the guys who were just going to go pick up the game and walk out and leave, and then there was a line for the people who had to wait and get whatever scraps were left. Um, Worked out in my favor because this night, wouldn't you know, that my neighbor also ordered the game, and he was at that same location. There's a couple different spots he could have gone, but he was there. And we started talking, and when they started letting us in, he said, "Come on, follow me." And so I did. And we both walked right through. I went in, I handed the guy my money, and I got a copy of the game right there. I know what you're thinking. Why did these people just let me through and follow my neighbor? Well, my neighbor, 6'5", 350 pounds, there wasn't anybody going to tell him that he couldn't do what he wanted to do. And thus, I got my copy of the game very, very quickly without any questions. It's like, yeah, I'm with him. And he's like, yeah, he's with me. And I had no issues at all. Still to this day, my favorite Madden uh, launch story. But I can tell you right now that that was one of my favorite things about stuff that just turned out to be a little different than what it was. All right, I believe that I have discussed the important stuff that I wanted to talk about on the main event. And as a direct result of that, I am about to, what I used to do on the other show, same show, different platform, I'm going to ring the bell. The main event is over. So now I'm going to move on to the next segment. And the next segment is one of my favorites. I love this one. It's called The Spear of the Week. Anyone who has listened to the show before knows that I am a wrestling fan as well as a football fan. And one of the craziest and best moves is the spear. For those of you who don't know, it's when you run full speed and tackle your opponent right in the gut. Just take them straight out. And I believe that people who do crazy things deserve such an impact. Turns out the other day that I was at one of the big box stores. We're on YouTube. We're not going to throw stores under the bus. What I did was waiting in line with my mother, and it turned out that this guy was trying to cut us off and get into the self checkout line in front of us. And essentially, he was saying, "Move out of the way." And then I simply turned around and gave him a look. And the look I gave him was, "Well, do you really want to do this?" And clearly he didn't. So, to make a long story short, the guy who tried to cut me and my mother off at the self checkout line is the recipient of the Spear of the Week. Now, I'm going to go into the next segment, which is equally as cool. This one is called, well, I'm not going to say what it's called yet. I'm going to do the segment. For those of you who don't know, I am a former corrections officer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And as a result, I've worked in the jails for 5 years before getting injured and having to retire early. During this time, I've seen things that would make you really question your life's decisions. And that's what this segment is about. Questioning your life's decisions. I'm going to talk to you for just a few minutes about the RHU. That's jargon inside of the inside of jail. The RHU is short for Restricted Housing Unit. For those of you who are unaware of what the Restricted Housing Unit is, I can give it to you in more colorful terms. Sometimes you may have heard it on shows called The Bucket, but other places you may have heard it by its more commonly known name, The Hole. Now, in The Hole, it's pretty much just what it sounds like. However, it's just regular cells, but you're completely isolated from the general population. Sometimes you'll have a cellmate, sometimes you won't. And you're in that cell for 23 hours a day. Depending on what you did in order to get to this position, because it is a punishment, or as one of my sergeants would say, it's like being in jail in jail. You would then have to be in that punishment spot in the RHU, the Restricted Housing Unit, for a length of time. Sometimes it's 30 days, sometimes it's 60 days, it could be 90, or as many as 120. Now, what you are allowed to do in that situation is literally nothing. You are locked in your cell for 23 hours during that day. They allow you to have a book, they allow you to have couple books. You can watch, at least in the jail that I worked on, there was a couple of TVs that you could see from various angles if you wish to watch TV that way, but most of the guys ended up just sleeping away the time. You get your 3 meals, but you have to eat those 3 meals in your cell. You have that hour period of time when you're out, and during that time, you get some exercise, go outside for a minute. You get to take a shower during that period of time. And you do get some phone calls if you're allowed based on the punishment that you've received. Now, you or I, if we were locked in our house for 23 out of 24 hours a day, sort of like the lockdowns we experienced during the pandemic, pretty much most of us went stir crazy and just didn't like it. Fortunately for us, that time has passed and we can walk outside anytime we want. And so we do. Imagine being stuck in that cell for that long. It's a nightmare. And thus, I'm about to tell you the name of this segment because of the reason of being in the RHU and being locked down for all that time. I would like to tell all of you that this is probably one of the best reasons. Don't go to jail. Okay, everybody, I have talked your ear off for quite a while. I hope that the people who have been loyal listeners to the lip continue to listen here on YouTube. And I hope that all of you who are now finding me on YouTube will take the initiative to like and subscribe to the channel, which is at Phil the Lip. That's where you can find me, at Phil the Lip. That's the YouTube channel. Um, there's still a Facebook page. The Lip Facebook page is still there. Join our group. And I've said it 100 times. There's always room for one more person to join. So don't be afraid. Come on, join the group. I'm out there somewhere on X. And you can find me at Instagram at Philip Henderson 5102. I'm going to be posting on there as well. At the end of the show, I like to do something called Words of Wisdom. And I have a bunch of those sitting in the archives of the other shows, 164 episodes worth of Words of Wisdom. I would certainly say that if you enjoy this, go ahead, look back, go to Spotify, find the Lip podcast, and listen to those episodes as well. They're going to come off a little differently, but the idea and premise is still going to be the same. I want to just entertain you as much as I entertain myself. I strongly recommend going ahead and going back to the archives and listening to the other shows. Once again, this is where I would give you the words of wisdom. And the words of wisdom today would simply be things that I would say to myself when I was sick in 2003. I ended up with an autoimmune disease called sarcoidosis, which zapped all the energy out of me, literally. There would be times when I would just sit for hours and not even realize I hadn't moved because I just didn't have any energy to do so. Considering what I had to do in order to get this show out there today on this podcast, I have to go back to those words that I kept saying to myself over and over and over again in order to just sort of motivate me to move. And those words were, I will not stop. I will never stop. I would say it over and over and over again. And that's where I'm at with this show. I will not stop. I will never stop. And those are the words of wisdom today. Once again, I'm going to mention the background for the show. It is an original piece of art that I created. It's a one of one, and I have several one of one pieces of art that I have made personally, customized them as they are. They are autographed and categorized individually, and eventually they're going to be for sale. I wanted to make mention of that because I think they make good backgrounds as well as just overall good pieces of art. But once again, I would like to thank everybody who has listened to The Lip when it was on Spotify. And I want to thank all of you who have just started listening to The Lip here on YouTube. And I encourage you all, be you uh, an original listener to this podcast, or if you're a new person who's just listening to it now, I definitely would appreciate it if you liked and subscribed to at Phil the Lip YouTube page. I would love it. And I would thank you very much, and I'm greatly appreciative of everyone who has listened to this show. And I can promise you that I will make sure that episode 166 will hit just like all the other ones do. Thank you for listening. My name is Phil, and you've just listened to The Lip.